Hello and welcome to another video. And first of all, my community is growing and all your comments were so nice. You're so nice to each other and very supportive comments to other people that are struggling at the moment, and it was just beautiful to read. I was up to about 3:30 this morning reading all your comments and trying to reply back to as many as I could, and yeah, they're all very, very heartfelt, and I just want to say thank you for all that. If you like these videos, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, it really helps. And yeah, I've got the, if you want to help a bit more, we've got memberships and buy me a coffee and super thanks, but just watching my videos and commenting is just enough, and I've really enjoyed reading those messages from last night's video. This one is a little bit strange. It come about, now I'm trying to get this right. So when we done the Eastbury Manor investigation for Threat Paranormal, one of the ladies there contacted one of their friends and they contacted me back, and out of that I got about 4 or 5 different locations of these strange stories, and this was one of them that I managed to speak to the couple involved. They were quite elderly at the time, unfortunately, but the notes I have on it and the bit of deep dive I've done on it since has not really clarified much, but I'm going to tell you their story and see what you make of it. So where are we? We are in Sandridge. Now that is just north of St Albans. My voice is really croaky today. I don't know what's up with it. But yeah, so we're just north of St Albans, and we are with Judith White and Douglas White, and he's got his name then. But this is 1963. Now they live in a house in the High Street in Sandridge. I'm getting it's Sandridge and not Sandwich. It's Sandridge. I don't know how to pronounce it there. Maybe different, but that's how I'm pronouncing it, and probably completely wrong. And they are just retiring. Now they're actually retiring a little bit early, so they're only 55, which wasn't originally the normal retirement age back in about 1963. So I would have been out of retirement in 2 years, but that ain't gonna happen, is it? So, but yeah. So anyway, going off track already. I know some people say they like me waffling, but I've got to try and stay focused sometimes. Now, from what I understand by speaking to them, they lived in this lovely house along the High Street. And I will say, I'm not going to identify the house. I'll correct that. I'm not going to tell you the house, but if you know, you know. There's ways of working that out in my videos, where the locations are. But we'll keep that, see what you can do. You know how these videos work. Alright, getting back. They live in the High Street in Sandridge. And it's a lovely house. And when they were talking to me, one thing they wanted to go over to me was that they were truly religious people. Yet all this stuff about ghosts and paranormal stuff, they did not believe in at all. Now, so this was 1963 this happened, and this was about 2007, maybe a bit later than that they were telling me this story. But this was October in 1963. They sleep in bed, they hear a dripping noise. Douglas gets up to look around to see if he can find it. He thinks a tap's left on in the bathroom or something as simple as that. He gets to where the bathroom is, nothing now. But as he pans back around and looks down the stairs, the whole house is flooded downstairs. They actually had a pipe burst. They actually flooded their whole house. So after a few days of clearing it all out, pumping all the house out, they were left in stripping the downstairs out completely. During this time, they also took the opportunity to clear out the pantry. That's it, pantry, forgot the name then. Clear out the pantry and remove all the flooring in there, even though that this was slightly raised a little bit, so the water didn't actually get into the pantry, but they cleared all that out, and so it's completely bare floor all over. As they removed the flooring in the pantry, they discovered a hatch. And I think now when I see YouTube, there's loads of these videos on YouTube of people finding these hatches in their house and secret compartments and all that. And the same excitement was probably shared by them back then. They got together and they broke open the sill on this hatch, and opened it up, and it was a big cellar that run right away underneath their house. Now when I say they broke it open, they literally had to get big saws in to cut through the floor, because when they lifted that hatch up, they could see that almost like railway sleepers had been put underneath that cellar lid. So whoever wanted to seal this cellar up done a pretty good job of it. After they broke through this wood, they entered this big cellar, and they went down the steps, they got some lights, went in there, had a look around, and it's completely empty. There's nothing in that cellar. They did notice some odd bits of paper down there, but nothing really to date that cellar. Now Judith believed that the house was built in around about 1720, but they are quite old houses. It is believed that the house has been remodelled on top of the older houses that used to be there at one point. Maybe the house was built in the 1800s and then just sort of changed around and remodified, because the houses don't look old. I mean, they do look old. They look sort of like early 19th century, maybe 18th century. So it could be the original house, it may not be. I'm going to stick some photos on here of the road itself. They're only from Google Earth, unfortunately. I haven't been down there. Another one that I was going to visit and haven't got to yet, but I will catch up. But I did find something very creepy in that cellar. That was on the beam on the stairs as you enter the cellar, and it was a hangman's noose. Now Douglas, he's been quite sensible, believed that the people who sealed that cellar up thought it would be quite creepy and spooky to put to put a noose on the stairs. And it's probably something that I do, you know. I'm sure in one of my old houses that I lived in, I wrote something on a wall, so when they pulled wallpaper off or something like that, I'm sure I've done something like that. But yeah, I would definitely do something like in the cellar if we was bricking it up. But I could not see any reason why this cellar would have been covered over. And of course you're already guessing that this is the worst thing they could have done in opening that cellar back up. Now I remember in the 80s watching a horror film where someone was living in the cellar and all this bad stuff happened in the cellar and all that. And it reminds me of the one in just east of Brentwood, just west of Brentwood, that I covered a while ago, with the new build where they built on top of a cellar. This is not very dissimilar to that. This is more terrifying in a way. Let's see what you think. Now by Christmas in 1963, all the flooring had been repaired and all the house was back to normal. Although Judith didn't think they was going to find a use for that cellar, no, everything in the house was quite okay as it was, but they didn't want to waste that extra space. At Christmas, Judith got Douglas a big wine rack and started buying him collections of wine, and they kept it in the cellar. The cellar was obviously ideal to store these wines, and he got quite into it, and by spring he had found himself with quite a nice collection, and he would start having wine nights with his friends coming around, and the cellar become a little bit of a boys club, or I'd say elderly gentlemen's club. And they end up putting some chairs down there, and they come down, do their little wine tasting, and even like with little cheese boards and all that, they were going all out on enjoying themselves. But it weren't going to last that long. During one of the wine nights, one of Douglas's friends become very ill. And when I say very ill, he passed out in the cellar and started sort of like coughing up a bit of blood. Now of course they got the ambulance there, he was taken away, and lucky enough he made a full recovery. The hospital could not say what had caused this. Now Douglas and Judith and some of the friends said there may have been something in one of the wine bottles that had cut his throat as he was drinking, but the hospital could not work out where this blood had come from. But you know, at the time he did pass out on the floor and was coughing up this blood. That seems to be the start of some weird events in that house. Just a couple of days later, they'd been out and they'd bought all their shopping. Now, sort of back in the 1960s, you didn't really have the big supermarkets. So you would go to the grocers and you'd get your veg for the week or just for a few days. You'd get your meat, and they did use their pantry. So all the fresh veg and all that stuff would go in their pantry. They had remodeled the pantry a little bit so you could actually use the cellar without obviously ruining the pantry itself. So they had this side cupboard in the pantry where they put all the bread. Judith got up in the morning to make breakfast, opened up the pantry, grabbed the bread, and she said it was like a furry animal. The bread had gone completely mouldy overnight. Now, the first time this happened, she put it down to dodgy bread that they bought from the shop. But this repeated itself over the next few weeks, and it wasn't just the bread that was going mouldy. Any fresh fruit or vegetables they put in that kitchen or in that pantry went mouldy within a day. Now, we could say that maybe all that damp had got into the room and it was causing mould to grow very, very quickly, but they had some tests done and everything was like totally dry. All the masonry was dry, all the wood was dry, so there's nothing there that actually explained why this food was going off so quick. The next bit I don't really want to tell you about, but it's because something I don't like myself, and it involves an animal and a cat, and the cat's name was Charles, and I believe it was a Ginger Tom. Now, the cat had lived with them all over the place, so they'd actually moved around quite a bit over the years, and the cat was used to new houses and all this sort of stuff. Judith and Douglas were going away for the evening, and they were going to come back till late afternoon the next day. Now, the cat, Charles, was fine with this. You know, he'd got used to this over the years, and they put food out for him, and everything was absolutely fine. They left the house, and Charles the cat was in the living room. Everything was shut. The cellar was shut, the pantry door was shut, all the windows are shut, and that is how that cat was used to. It was perfectly fine. They went away, and they come back the next day. They open up the door, and they can't find the cat anywhere. And they're really puzzled by this because it couldn't have got out. No, the litter tray hadn't been used, and that was very, very unusual for their cat. And they're getting very concerned. They're checking under the beds and everything. And a few days went past, they still couldn't find where this cat had gone. And I can't put it off any longer, but after a few more days, Douglas was having his friends over for another wine evening. And he went down to prep the cellar and get the wines out and get the glasses out ready for his friends to come around. And it was the first time he'd been in that cellar since they'd been away. He opens up that cellar door. He goes down the steps. On the long table where they put the bottles of wine was the cat's body. And the cat's body was missing their head. Now, that head of that cat was never found. So, Douglas is traumatised. They can't work out how that cat had got down there or how that cat had lost its head. Judith and Douglas were absolutely devastated. Since their children had grown up and left home, and this was their partner, this was like a part of their family had just passed away, and there was no explanation on how this happened. From that moment on, things just got, well, I won't say worse, but more weird in that house. A few nights after, they're asleep in bed. They started hearing this banging, and both Judith and Douglas get up and they're walking around the house and they can't find what's causing this banging noise. Eventually they make it to the kitchen, work out that the cellar lid was banging, lifting up and banging. Now, originally you could probably turn around and say it was a draft coming up from that cellar. That cellar had no windows. There was no airflow through that cellar at all. Nothing could create it to lift up. They're standing there and they are nervous of lifting this cellar lid up. Douglas walks over to the cellar. He holds onto the hatch and he said he can feel it forcing it up. So he lifts it full up, and what he'd done when they found it, they put a hook on it and he hooked it to the wall so that cellar lid was up and it couldn't fall back down again. As he done that, this big blast of warm air flew up through the cellar. Maybe there's some scientific explanation that the air down there got hot and it was rising and it was causing it to flap. But they went down the cellar and there's nothing unusual at all. There's nothing odd down there, apart from the fact that it was warm air. Now Douglas said that cellar was perfect for his wines, and that's because it was always cold and it was no need for this warmth to come in. That warm air was unexplained. The next night they are sitting in their living room, which is literally one wall away from the cellar and the kitchen. They start hearing the banging of that cellar lid again. Because of what happened the night before, the banging and all that, Douglas knew that it was pointless going down and explore it. He wasn't going to find nothing. He actually went in there with, I guess this is like going back in time with the old beers. It was like one of those big cans of beer that you used to get, and he put that on top of the cellar door so it couldn't lift up. So they went back into the living room. They're sitting there playing dominoes, and it's quite like a half light they've got in that living room. When they noticed something that was a bit weird, not on the wall where the kitchen is, but on the wall that sort of like backs onto the front of the house, along the skirting board was like a bright light shining along the skirting board. They both got up and they was looking, and they said that literally this light, where the skirting board was and the floor was, this light was coming through it, as if somebody was underneath or the outside the wall shining the light down. They opened up the front door, looked around, and like there's no light outside that could be causing it. They went back in there and they could still see this little light going along the side of their skirting board. But after a few minutes it started to fade away till they couldn't see it anymore. Puzzled, they sat down and carried on playing dominoes. Some time passed and we actually get round to the summer of 1964. Judith and Douglas's daughter, Catherine, decided that she was going to send them on a short break. And what she was going to do, she was going to come over with her daughter Alice and stay in their house while those two went off for a short break. Now, it was only going to be a weekend. And again, you know what's coming. Things are going to get worse for their daughter and Alice. Now, despite Judith and Douglas living in that house for a few years, Catherine had never stayed there. She'd moved out years ago, but Douglas and Judith had moved around houses quite a few times, so she'd actually never stayed at this house. She was aware of some of the things that happened in the cellar, but not really that interested in it, just thinking it was a run of bad luck. She couldn't explain the cat, but the explanation that Judith said, I'm going to say this is just horrible. I will say rubbish, but it is rubbish because it couldn't have happened. But what Catherine said was that she believed that as Douglas had done everything in the house to lock up, one of the last things she thinks he did was to close the cellar door, and that the cat was trying to get out of the cellar as he shut the door. It's an explanation. Don't think it's possible. He would have seen that, okay? But what happened for Catherine and Alice was that Catherine stayed in the guest bedroom and Alice slept in there with her. 3 o'clock in the morning, Catherine is woken up by something. She wakes up and she feels that there's something wrong, but she can't put her finger on it. Then she realises that Alice isn't next to her. And she gets up, checks the bathroom. Alice isn't in the bathroom. She goes down into the living room. Alice isn't in the living room. She enters the kitchen and the pantry door is open. And Alice is sitting on top of the cellar lid. And Alice turns around and says something that chills her to the bones. And the words that Alice said was, "The gentleman asked me to come down and see him." Now this petrified Catherine. She's in that house all on her own, and who is this gentleman, and is this a dream? Is her daughter sleepwalking? After a few checks, no, she was wide awake. That daughter was wide awake, and she's asking her who this gentleman was. Now Alice is actually 6 years old, so she communicates very, very well, and what she says is that she woke up in bed with her mum, and standing by the doorway was this gentleman in a black suit, and he asks her to follow him, and he says, well, can mummy come too? And he says, no, just you, follow me. And she follows him down the stairs and into the kitchen. The gentleman opens up the cellar floor, goes down into the cellar, but before Alice can get there, the lid shuts on that cellar. But for some reason, Alice says she doesn't know why, she went and sat on top of that cellar lid. Not surprisingly, that was enough for Catherine. She picked Alice up, got their stuff, got in the car and left. Now obviously they couldn't, it's not like modern world today, you can just phone people up and tell them you're not staying there. She wrote a note and left it on the table and said that, thinking that her mum and dad will come in, see that first of all, and understand they've actually gone home. What actually happened was that when Judith and Douglas returned home, they walk into that house and it stinks. There's a really horrible mouldy smell in that house. Again, some people try to put it down to the damp may still be in that building, but all the food that they brought for Catherine, all the fresh food they brought for Catherine in that kitchen was mouldy. The apples and the bananas they brought for Alice were literally like liquefied. They'd gone off so quick, they're just like mush on the countertop, and the lid to the cellar was open. They walk down the cellar and they are horrified by what they see. All over the floor in that cellar was decapitated crows. And so there must have been about 40 or 50 of them just laying all over that floor. And on top of the table was a note written by Catherine saying that they'd gone home. Now, of course, they spoke to Catherine, and Catherine saying that she shut all the windows, all the doors when she left, and she left the note on the table in the living room and not down in the cellar. What Douglas and Judith did, they went up to their local church. Now, this is Leonard's church, not the same Leonard's church that was in the other video the other day. This is the Leonard's church in the village. Spoke to the vicar, and the vicar come round and done a blessing on that house. Now, the vicar said that he actually felt the house was very, very peaceful and was a very loving building. So they're quite confused by all the stuff that had gone on. The next day, things didn't escalate, but they were asleep in bed and that loft hatch was banging really loud. They walked down, and as they got to the kitchen, there's a really bright light shining through that loft hatch. There's no lights down there. When Douglas goes down there for his wine evening, he takes all these candles like candelabras down there and puts them around. Atmospheric. All his friends were very impressed with it. They said it was a bit gothic and they used to enjoy that sort of feeling. But there's no light, and this is a bright white light coming out of that cellar. They walked up to it and they looked down. As they looked down into the cellar, the light turned off. But they went down, checked round. Again, nothing unusual in that cellar. No dead birds, nothing. Just the wine rack and the table and the chairs that they'd put there for their wine evening. As they turned round to go back through the living room and to go upstairs, once again, that light along the skirting board was apparent to them. They're thinking that maybe this light comes from the cellar and it's coming through maybe the cracks in the walls that is lighting up the cellar, and you can see it through the building. But when they turned round, they could see that where the loft hatch was down, there's no light coming around that loft hatch, so it didn't make sense to them. Judith used to like baking cakes, and she was attending a cake baking day in St Albans, and she relayed a few of the things that had gone on to one of the friends there. They're like, oh, actually, you know what? We know some people who do seances. Would you like us to come do a seance in your cellar and see what they can connect with? And she's like, oh no, I don't believe in anything like that. And she goes back home, she's talking to Douglas, and they're poo-pooing it. And at the same time they're poo-pooing it, they can't explain all these events that had gone on in their house. So they've been more drawn to the conclusion that maybe something weird was now going on that is beyond their own belief system. Now it comes to probably the most terrifying bit about the whole thing. And this is what makes them try to resolve it quickly. Their daughter comes back round with little Alice. Alice isn't scared, and she spends the day playing in the garden, running around the house, and just generally enjoying themselves. The family not talking about the event, so it's sort of the furthest thing from their mind. They've got other things to talk about, and they're just generally enjoying themselves. Judith is cooking a Sunday roast, so Alice is around trying to help out, doing things like peeling the Brussels and just little odd jobs like that. Judith said that she's standing there and she's peeling potatoes at the kitchen sink, and she's almost done when she hears Alice scream, and it was like a breathless scream, as if something was almost like squeezing her as she's trying to make a noise. She turns round to see the cellar lid open and Alice's hands gripping onto the top of that cellar with her legs almost parallel down into the cellar. She thinks that Alice has fallen. She runs over there, she grabs Alice's arms and starts to pull her back up. But somebody is pulling Alice's legs, and there's a tug of war going on with Alice. Judith is screaming at the top of her voice for help. Catherine runs in from the living room, and when she gets there, Judith is also halfway down those stairs, and she's on her knees, bending down, trying to pull Alice up. She's losing her balance. Catherine grabs her. She manages to pull Judith back up the stairs and grabs hold of one of Alice's arms and pulls her up. Alice is left with cuts all over her legs. Over the next few days, she would actually come out with bruises all around her ankles as somebody had been grabbing her. But at that time, they didn't see that, they just see the cuts on her legs. They put her out, they take her into the room and they sit on the sofa. They're trying to get out of her about what happened. Alice once again talks about the man in the dark suit. She said that she turned round and there was a man standing in the kitchen by that cellar hatch and pointing to come down to the cellar. And she said that she walked over there. As she got near the cellar, two hands come out and grabbed her and decided to pull her down the cellar. This has terrified the whole family. Douglas comes in, he goes down the cellar, nothing in that cellar. This is final straw. Straight away, Judith phones up her friend and says, okay, I want that seance around the house. So midweek, these people turn up to do the seance in the cellar. Now Douglas, by this time, is open to anything. Although, as I say, he says to me that he does not believe in anything like that. But at the same time, he can't explain the events that have gone in that house. And he said at the time it was the most terrifying experiences they've ever gone through. This seance takes place. There's 8 people around a table in that cellar. Now, I've only got Judith and Douglas's words on this, and there's no written report about what happened. Douglas says that during that seance, the person leading it contacted a man that used to live in that house in the 1700s. That is where I come up with the confusion about the dates of the house. Now, Douglas says that the cellar does look older than the rest of the building, so it is plausible that that cellar is original and an older, newer house is built on top of it. But this gentleman turns out not to be a very nice piece of work, and he may have been responsible for people going missing in that local area during the lifetime that he was alive. And the reason why he was going after Alice was that she looked like one of the girls that he may have dealt with back then. I know I've got to stick to YouTube's restrictions and all that, so I'm not going to go into details about what this person may have done. I will say that digging into the history of that area, it's totally plausible that these events did take place. That something like this did go on around the area of St Albans and on Sandridge. So, you know, is it a stretch of imagination to say this is where this person lived? Probably not. But no, you've got to be open, I guess, on this one. You know, I'm skeptic and all this sort of side of it all. But things start lining up. You've got Judith and Douglas that are so skeptical, and from that day they are still skeptical. They still don't believe in ghosts and all that, but they can't explain what happened in that building. The gentleman agrees that he's going to leave the family alone. Douglas is not convinced that any of this is really true. But from that moment on, nothing ever happened in that house in the next year and a half that they lived there. It was agreed that after the experience that Alice has been through, it wouldn't be nice for their granddaughter to come round to a house where something traumatic like that happened to her. And they soon moved out of that house. Now, I know the house is still there. I say I'm not going to name it and I'm not going to show photos of it. But, you know, you can have a look around that street on your own. But when you come to stories like this in these little villages, there's so many. There are so many of these. And I know that we talk about the Psychic Research Society, the Ghost Club, and all these other people that go around and do all these old investigations. And the document files, there was a member on here who is a part of one of those societies. And he's telling me that the reference library and the files for the Psychic Research Society are just immense, absolutely immense. And these are things that have been reported over hundreds of years. So I'm not surprised we get little stories like this that are known locally or people experience and they only tell a few people. And I felt privileged to hear this story. It was a privilege to speak to Douglas and Judith. I know they were in their later years when I spoke to them. Unfortunately, I'm guessing they probably would have passed away by now. But no, they were such a lovely couple when I spoke to them. They were eager to tell their story, but more eager to turn around and say that they didn't believe in ghosts and paranormal stuff. Even though this happened to them and they can't explain it, they still remain very sceptical about paranormal. Anyway, thank you for listening to me waffle on with this story. There was a few little bits I left out because I gave too much detail on where the house was. But you know where to look. The clues are there. But again, if you like the video, thumbs it up, put a comment below. And I always say about making a comment at the end. Do you know what, on this comment here, what I'd like you to comment this time is actually a location that in your life you've been to that you find creepy. So start with something like Cambridge or Lake District or Yorkshire. So start with a name of a location like that, and I'll see you in the next video. So this one comes out Friday, so that means I've got to edit it tonight and get it up, so it's going to be a quick turnaround. So you'll see this one Friday, which means I've got to edit this one as soon as possible, and then the next video will be up on Tuesday. I am planning to go out and film for the next video. It is weather dependent, and it is dependent on a tyre on my car as well. So try and find the money to replace the tyre of my car, which is ridiculous. Really gone up, haven't they? Prices of tyres on cars. What's happened there? Total inflation of a tyre. No pun intended, of course. Anyway, waffling on again. I'll see you in the next video. Take care of yourselves, please. And have a good few days. And I'll see you on Tuesday. Bye.